Hi, this is Steph, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, broadcasting from New Haven, Connecticut.
Hello and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to join me on an exploration of what makes the Elm City tick. Josh Elliott is making our city and our state tick. He's a state representative from just over the border in Hamden. We consider it the outer neighborhood. And he's been making noise up at the Capitol. Welcome back to the WNHH studio, Josh Elliott.
Thanks for having me.
It's always great to have you in the studio.
Good to be here.
So, Josh, 2 years ago, we were in a very different place from where we are now, in a lot of ways, including in the political career of Josh Elliott. 2 years ago, nobody really knew you statewide. You were, except your friends. You had worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign. You got fired up about politics. You and a whole bunch of Bernie-crats decided we're going to go local.
Mm-hmm.
And you took on a very prominent state entrenched Democrat and beat him in a primary, and then beat a Republican who actually bothered running for office, which doesn't always happen in blue towns.
Mm-hmm.
And you got elected to the legislature as a newbie.
Yeah.
So now you're running again. What's it like? Any primaries? Any hard-charging Republican opponents?
No primary. It's really important to me, and I've been saying this to people around the state, is that when you are coming in as a challenger, you have to think a little bit longer term than just that immediate knee-jerk reaction of fighting against the party when they naturally want to sort of keep you out, keep their friend in. So your job is just going to be really make sure that when the time comes and you do get elected, that you're able to work well with people. So I made it a priority when I did run 2 years ago to run a really clean race, to not talk disparagingly about either my Democratic or Republican contender. And then it made it so that this time around, people didn't feel like I was the outsider opponent or the outsider candidate anymore. I was really just one of them. We had a lot of turnover on the DTC, a lot of turnover on city council.
Democratic Town Committee.
Correct. And for that reason, it meant that this time around, when I announced that I was going to be seeking re-election, it wasn't a surprise to anybody, and people didn't feel that I had let them down. And so I was able to get a pass in terms of that, inner circle of, that inner politics aspect. And I do have a Republican candidate, and as far as I could tell from the last filing, I think she had raised $330. So I've raised my money. We haven't applied for our grant yet. That's going to be happening over the next week and a half, 2 weeks or so. But
And that's grant for public finance.
Correct. So
How
we
much
should
do you
be okay
need for that?
So last cycle, it was $5,000 and 150 individual contributions that come from somewhere within a town that you represent. This year, since we changed it last year, it's now 5,100, but that 150 individual contribution still applies. And it's contributions
so it doesn't
anywhere.
have to be your district. It could be your town.
It could be anywhere in your town. So, for example, Robin Porter represents some of Hamden, some of New Haven. She can get money from anywhere within those two towns that will go towards the 150 qualifying. For myself, since my district represents only a portion of Hamden, I can only get money from somewhere in Hamden. And this year, it's $250, whereas last cycle was $5 to $100. We made a rule change that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of public policy. I think some people felt that it might be easier for, who knows, maybe incumbents to raise that $250 from individual and not have a hard time getting that $5,100. For me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I really stuck to making sure that nobody gave me more than $100, and that's how I
what was
got
Bernie's
my grant.
again? $27?
$27, I think that's right, yeah.
See, I had an argument with my sister, who's a diehard Bernie-crat, and I kind of am too, but that's just off the record. But I was skeptical that it was exactly $27 average donation for the entire 6 months he was saying that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? You don't think it was ever 30 or 21?
Oh, I don't know. I think it just becomes sort of just a rule of thumb, an indicator that he's getting, those small contributions. I'm sure it was never 27 on the dot.
So, Josh Elliott, you were just saying that now you're one of them. Do you really feel that way, that you're one of the Democratic side, or has it changed what it means to be a Democratic insider? You said that the town committee has changed. What's going on?
So I'll give you one example. So there's a colleague of mine, not up at the Capitol, but working in municipal politics. And throughout the course of my campaign, for those 3 months when the party establishment was working against me, and I was really working with my friends and some unions as well, I was knocking doors every single day for a few hours every single day, on weekends more than a few. And I happened upon this door. His name was Corey O'Brien, and we had about a 10-minute conversation. It became pretty clear that we were in sync politically. So what ended up happening was, over the course of a year, he got involved in the Democratic Town Committee. He ran for an election for a seat on City Council, and then became majority leader. And
Wow.
So what I have found is that just by this grassroots politics model of really going out, knocking on doors, talking with people individually, and bringing new people into the mix, you can change what the party looks like. So I have found that over the last 2 years, there has been this switch where it's rail against the system. But now, if I want to actually get any of those things that I'm talking about done, it's not going to work to my advantage to be sort of bashing people over the head if they disagree with me. It's going to be more of that relationship building. And I think that's for some people who are not elected, they get frustrated, and you're one of them. At the same time, if we actually want to do these things that I think we need to do, it's not just convincing people on the ground floor, but it is going to be convincing people that are elected too. So it's going to be getting new blood, new people, new faces in, but then also making sure that people who are there, who are going to be there for a long time, that they feel protected by their constituency. So my job isn't just to explain to my constituency what I'm trying to do. It's to also spread that message out into wider areas. I mean, I think that there should be a light blue ring around every urban center, is that we should have people in all these more congested areas and deeply...
Light blue or bright blue?
Bright blue would be nice, but let's go with light blue for now. And it'll be just to make sure that that everybody who's an elected official feels that they can, push the ball forward in terms of pushing whatever agenda that they want to do.
And now I know that one changed also as a result of the 2016 presidential election, in this case, the election of Donald Trump, is that Hamden's progressive grassroots caught fire. So you had the Hamden PAN, the Progressive Action Network. They started being a group that even Republicans feel they need to meet because, just sort of in good George Logan met with them in a good spirit.
Yep.
How have they changed the dynamics of the city in terms of who serves on committees and on the council and who runs for office?
So there's, like any group, there's going to be some people that are more active than others. And I think that HamPan, just like any other group, is going to be indicative of that. I think, on their Facebook page, they have maybe coming up on 500 people, but the number of people that are active and involved are somewhere between 5 to 10. Some of them are running for office. Some of them are around the state knocking on doors. Some of them are just making sure that the Facebook page stays, refreshed. And I think...
So they don't still get 100 people to a meeting or 50 if they hold an event?
Well, I'm... The last event that I remember them holding, the big event, was one that they held at the middle school, and there was about, I would say, 75 or 100 or so people. I think that this isn't not a reflection on HamPan. This is a reflection, I think, on just any sort of political movement or any sort of energy, is that it comes and goes in waves. And I think after the election of 2016, people were really fired up. But it's not that initial shock that's going to get us these wins. It's this long, sustained movement. And I think that when people look at whatever party politics or establishment politics is, I think that these 5 or 10 people that have started getting involved, like my friend Corey O'Brien or like Jen Pope, George Fernandez, people that are really holding up what this structure is. And then, of course, there's Sean Grace and Valerie Horsley, who are really involved in some of this political work over that year before they decided to run in the 17th district for the Senate seat. I think that what ends up happening is after 5, 10, 15 years, it's these people that are really holding up these organizations.
You get a core out of these new groups.
That you get the new core, and then you hope that every new core is able to be a little more forward thinking and push the ball forward.
So Josh Elliott, we talked at the outset of the show about how different it looks for you and for your kind of candidate 2 years from now and from 2 years ago. What made you decide to hang in? I mean, you spent 2 years, very busy 2 years. You were at the forefront of a lot of big debates at the Capitol. From raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, to legalizing marijuana, to bringing on tolls, to having paid family leave. You were really out front with Robin Porters and some others carrying that torch.
Right.
After 2 years of doing that, when you hadn't had any experience in elected office, what makes you want to run again? for state representative.
You sort of feel like you have unfinished business, and I understand why people now stay there for 20, 30, 40 years, that there's this whole slate of things that you want to accomplish, and maybe you get one or two things accomplished, but there's still that whole slate of things you want to do. So the way that I see it now is it's not so much, I think one big complaint is people say you talk, but you don't get anything done. Well, we're sort of limited by the fact that I'm not the only person up there legislating, that there's 151 of us in terms of the House, there's 36 of us in the Senate, and you sort of need to wait until there's the stars align and you have the electoral politics on your side to get some of these things through. You can sort of work within what you have and push some people if you're already near the finish line. So for tolls, for example, we were 1 vote away. For things like minimum wage, we were 1 or 2 votes away. Things where it's like, you were so close, why couldn't you get it done? Well, it's not a matter of us getting it done. It's a matter of some of these people not already being there. So one example is that in 2010, 2008, when we abolished the death penalty, some of the big talk was that a lot of progressive legislation had been in the works for decades. And it wasn't until we had a Democratic governor, it wasn't until we had a legislature that was going to be proactive on some of these issues that we're able to get these things done. So my goal now and my perception has shifted in that I want to talk about these range of things and keep the idea alive. You have Yankee Institute and the Connecticut Business Industry Association talking in disparaging ways about tolls. And the fact is that no matter who's going to be in the majority, we're going to have to get tolls in just because we can't have failing roads and bridges, that the gas tax is not going to be bringing enough money. And the DOT has told us within 5 years that they're going to be bankrupt and out of money. They're not going to be able to actually upkeep our infrastructure. So for that reason, we're going to get tolls. It's a matter of when. It's a matter of who's in the majority when we do it. So it's an easy way for them to attack us. So for me, it's just the idea, let's keep paid family medical leave. Let's keep $15 minimum wage. Let's keep legalization. Let's keep talking about it, because if we talk about it, yes, they'll dirty us. Yes, they'll slam us. But at the same time, they're talking about it too. And as long as the idea is alive, then when the right number of people with the right ideas are in place, that's when we'll get these things done.
And we talked about this when you were on in the middle of the session, which is that you brought up death penalty is a great example, Josh Elliott, that it's not just that you wait. You got to build support over time to make it more possible. So with the death penalty, that was an effort over many years. Mm-hmm. And then it finally passed the legislature, but it was still vetoed by a Republican governor. Mm-hmm. And by the time it got to the Democrat governor signed it, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know that you could have just started out of the gate the first time and done that.
I don't think so either. I think it takes a long time. It takes a combination of not just people on the ground floor and people pushing from the outside, but people also within the inside who are really proactive. I know Senator Gary Winfield was really instrumental in getting this done, and a lot of people really took ownership of the idea of getting this through, and I think that's what it takes, people taking ownership of these ideas. But the problem is that if you have somebody who's a little bit more moderate, conservative-minded, whether or not you're Republican or Democrat, in a district where you think you're going to get punished for these ideas, then you're just going to be much less apt to buck the status quo. And for those reasons, that's why we need people at the grassroots level knocking doors or running these insurgent campaigns talking about these ideas, saying this is so important that I think that if you're not on board with this, that you will not get elected. So here's one example. So when I ran in 2016, I wasn't really making legalization part of my platform. I talked about it when it came up, but it wasn't like something that I put on mailers. Things I put on the mailers were $15 an hour, paid family medical leave, making sure that our elections are clean. But when it comes to legalization, it's something that I believed in strongly, but I wasn't going to make that part of my platform. Now, what ended up happening was after a month and a half, 2 months, my opponent started putting out a push poll against me, which basically, instead of asking questions, it's more like, did you know that my opponent stands for this, this, and this? So one of those things was legalization. And what I found was when I was knocking on doors, people were saying, oh, you're going to be the legalization guy. Well, then my vote's with you. So it ended up working against my opponent. And I think that's what we need to do, is that I see myself and Ava Bermuda Zimmerman and Robin Porter and some other legislators that are really proactive on issues. We're the people that are going to be talking about these issues and getting really, really dirty, because they're a departure from the status quo. So it's going to make people scared, angry, fearful, whatever the case may be. But then what's going to happen is we make these ideas popular, because hopefully these are correct ideas, right ideas, that people can put these ideas through the idea mill. And then what ends up happening is that we then have that group of people that will eventually be on board because we made it popular for them. So that's just what I see my job as in the legislature.
Okay, and you're listening to Josh Elliott, a state representative from Hamden, running for a second term, a Democrat, and he's here on Dateline New Haven on WNHH FM. And I think, Josh, you may be the first guest in 3 years who talks faster than I do.
Oh, I'll slow it down. I made myself some really strong coffee this morning, so I just have to make sure I'm modulating okay.
So you talked about moderate Democrats, and that's in the last session, some of the stuff that the Democrats cared a lot about, like an early version of the budget that did not have as deep cuts to social services, or that might have raised some revenues, were killed because the Democrats were tied with Republicans in the Senate. They actually had one vote extra because lieutenant governor, and they had a small enough margin in the House that defecting Democrats were able to basically let the Republicans set the agenda for the last session. So basically, even though Democrats had tiny advantage in numbers, the Republicans actually won that session, I would say. And there was Lonnie Reed, a state representative Democrat from Brantford, Gail Schlossberg, Democratic state senator, correct, from Milford. They take some key votes, like in weakening our affordable housing law. So that within weeks of that passing in Milford, the local community was now able to kill an affordable housing proposal, and on the budget as well, to prevent any revenue hikes and to have deeper cuts in social services. What did you learn from that?
I learned that it takes a very small number of people to stop a lot of legislation. I think we had in both directions, and I think potentially we need to be learning our lesson from this next year when we might not control a chamber or we might not control the governorship, and just know what that looks like. There were 3 senators. There was Doyle, Hartley, and Schlossberg, who are deeply conservative Democratic senators that made our lives very, very difficult. And then there's about 3 to 5 more conservative Democrats in the House that made our lives difficult too. Of course, there is Lonnie Reed, but she isn't running for re-election. But there's others.
Schlossberg's not running for re-election.
Schlossberg is also not running for re-election. Doyle is running for AG, but Hartley is running for re-election. So
Doyle was one of the conservative.
Doyle is one of the conservative senators.
And what did he vote conservative on?
I believe he voted for the Republican budget and against the Democratic budget, just as a number of House members
did. Did he vote also on the affordable housing weakening?
I'm not sure what he was on 830G. I'm not sure. The 830G, that was about, I think, 7 to 10 years in the making. And Roland Lamar, a colleague of mine who is a fierce progressive line, he's absolutely phenomenal. He got swung on this vote as well. Didn't like the bill, but from his perspective, because it had been in the works for so long, he felt that this was the best it was going to get, and it didn't do as much damage as previous iterations of the bill had done. So I think that, from my perspective as being someone who's new to this and just jumping in that stream, it wasn't a good bill. It didn't do things that need to be done. It was that sort of push-pull between towns and the state and protecting, municipalities' independence in terms of what sort of housing they have there. But it also smacked of redlining, and it also smacked of trying to keep those people out of our town.
Which happened weeks after it was passed.
Right, of course. And that was the whole point. And that was the whole point of the people who were pushing this bill forward. So, yeah, that was definitely a frustration.
And now, so a few months ago, you got a lot of attention for saying you passed a survey to all your colleagues, a little bit chutzpahdik. You said, okay, I want to know where you all stand on these issues I care about, and it was going to be used as a list to decide whom to primary. Did you end up primarying anyone?
So, initially what I wanted to do was, I'm a game player, so the first thing you do when you learn a new game is you need to know how all the pieces work together, and you need to know what the rules are. So for me, before I could try to pass any of the 20, 25, 30 things that I wanted to do, I wanted to see where everybody was on these issues, and I wanted to see how the system worked. So it was also really important to make sure that I knew who the people were. So I spent a few months just really getting a chance to know my Democratic colleagues. And I did this by assembling an Excel spreadsheet and asking people about these issues. And I wasn't even pushing them on these issues. I really just wanted to see where they were at. And what I was able to do with this information, and this was not intentionally the plan at the outset, was I was able to see on whatever my personal scale, who are the people that are more likely to be with me on these issues and people who are not. But then I was also able to see which issues were more likely to pass versus those which were not. And there are definitely some people where, even though we wear the same D next to our name, we could not be farther apart in terms of the issues. So then the question becomes, strategically for me, do I have enough time and energy to try to primary all of these people that I think are not really good for the party because they represent such different things that it makes our party look sort of nebulous and directionless? And I think the answer ultimately is no, I don't have enough time and energy for that. I think, if you look at the Jack Welch model of how he ran GE, and I certainly am not going to be following his model exactly, but there's this idea of yank and rank. Now, he sort of perverted that idea that even if you have a bunch of A players, that if you have somebody who's on the bottom of that A player ranking system, that they're gone anyway. I think if you have a bunch of A players, you keep those A players and you try to grow out that bench. But there's a number of people that I felt like they weren't doing what I felt they needed to be done. So one example is I did have somebody, his name was Adrian, and he was going to run for a House seat on the shoreline against a colleague of mine. And this is something that you just really don't do as a Democrat, because you really want to make sure that you're maintaining those relationships. But because of how she voted on the budget both ways, but because of how she dealt with the Millstone negotiation, I felt that there wasn't a lot of inclusiveness in terms of bringing that party in. So, I sort of dirty myself and make myself somewhat untrustworthy in some of my colleagues' eyes. And that makes it, so that I have to be extra transparent in terms of what I'm doing, what I'm not doing, why I'm doing these things. So at least people know that when I am making myself known in terms of these other races against somebody within the party, they at least understand why. So I'm not trying to be unfair about it, and I just don't have the bandwidth to do all of it.
You were supporting Agent to run against Lonnie Reed.
That's correct.
But then she decided not to run.
She decided not to run, but then
there's
also
that was part of why.
I have no idea. I mean, I think there were rumors of her looking at retirement anyway, so this may have just been one extra consideration. I would say that, what I've learned from this experience too is that, my time may be better spent really just going and trying to help out with those people that have already decided on their own, that have their own personal connections. It's really hard to try to create a campaign and try to be that forward momentum for that candidate. They really have to want to own it. They really have to want to be proactive. So in the end,
did you take on any incumbents?
In the end, no, I actually did not end up taking on any incumbents. I really now swiveled almost exclusively to helping out Democratic candidates in coin flip districts, people who I know are going to be really good on the issues, who I know will work really hard, who have
in primaries or general.
In the general, I'm trying to stay away from most of the primaries. Some of the primaries, I mean, what I'm mostly doing, since my background is negotiation, arbitration, and mediation, I was actually the president for the Society of Dispute Resolution at Quinnipiac, and I coach some teams to national competitions. I see my strong suit as helping candidates at doors be the best candidate, be the best version of themselves, as opposed to just dumping a whole bunch of bodies on one day of door knocking, which is also good. But my feeling is that if I help you a little bit at that door, then for the next 5,000-10,000 doors that you hit, you'll be able to be much more persuasive at doors.
So you're going to use the Excel spreadsheet just to know the lay of the land in terms of choosing which issues to press and with whom. I mean, that you're focusing in your electoral activity with general election candidates who could get some help on the doors in a coin flip district.
Yep, yeah. I mean, for me, what it was I just wanted to know where all the people were at. And now that I know where they're at, there's no real reason to do much more work with it. I mean, what I'll likely do with any new people that I haven't talked to yet, I'll want to do a brief update, and maybe at some point next year I'll do a brief update too. But one thing I didn't do, and I was pretty clear about when I was talking with people and being pretty transparent about this, is I didn't make that information public. And even when I was going around the house and checking out who was going to be for minimum wage and who was not, I also did not make that information public either. And I didn't make that promise to everybody that saying that I wouldn't make it public. I just didn't. So, there is a degree to which I'm still keeping people's confidences, even if I'm going to be looking at this as a living, breathing body that I want to do my best to make sure that it's as healthy and vibrant as possible.
And the living, breathing body belongs to State Rep Josh Elliott from Hamden, running for a second term as a Democrat here in Dateline, New Haven at 103.5 FM WNHH, your home for community radio. Philip Thibodeau writes in on Facebook. Thanks for listening. Thanks for commenting, Philip. I think has a Don Quixote icon. Mm-hmm. Thanks for your hard work on behalf of the left, Josh. Is there a blue wave coming, driven by anti-Trump sentiment? How does it match up with the strong backlash against Malloy, the Democratic governor who's leaving, least popular governor in the United States?
Yeah.
In other words, will local issues in Connecticut make life hard for Dems despite the favorable national environment? Excellent question, Phil. Thank you.
Yeah. So we know that Malloy was about 10 points below Trump in terms of popularity in our state, which to me just boggles my mind. And I think a large part of that was that Malloy just didn't do a good job of massaging ideas. He was really good at doing a few things. A, he made sure that we're on the path to fiscal sustainability by making sure that we're putting money away for our pension obligations, which is really 45 years worth of mismanagement that is all on the head of one person, which is sort of unfair, but that's the way it's been painted. And I think Malloy has gladly and willingly accepted that role, and to make sure that Connecticut is doing much better. He's done a lot in terms of ensuring that we're closing down prisons and ensuring that we have a second chance society. So he's done a lot of good. He's also made government more efficient. Those are really big. And not only that, he also, I mean, depending on what your perspective is, there's a lot, I think 16% fewer state employees than there were when he started. So there's some major shifts that he made in government, which he doesn't get credit for. And some of these are actually conservative shifts, which I think were good. And some of these were more progressive shifts, which I think were good. But one thing that he was really bad at was, he was really bad at working with the legislature and allowing some of his ideas to be morphed and molded and allowed to grow on their own. He really tried to push things through by fiat, and I think that made it difficult for him to get some of these bigger issues through. And then the other thing was he didn't bother selling ideas before, during, and after he got them through. And I think it's really important
I would take one disagreement with you,
please.
Respectfully. When he was first elected, I saw him go, let's say, the Chamber of Commerce in New Haven, say, no, you guys hate tax increases. I'm also getting $1 billion in concessions from labor. It turned out to be more like 600,000, I think. But, in reality. But, we're going this one time to fix the budget. And I saw the people in the room say, okay. And I saw him sell that pretty well. And I saw him go around on the Second Chance Society, too, on the hustings, radio, TV, a lot of community meetings. Now, I'm not disagreeing with your larger point.
Yeah.
I think there's no question he didn't communicate successfully certain aspects of his record, especially about reducing the size of government and how to deal with the pensions, which are hard to explain. When you talk about the two different tiers and the older employees, retirees.
I think we're at 6 tiers.
Oh, 6 tiers. Okay. But that the biggest problem was people who had retired a long time ago.
Right.
So, but I think what happened with that first time was that I didn't know any other governor in the country at the time who was able to get both tax hike and labor concessions through a legislature, which was hard, but that the magnitude of
he
the
also
structural
had,
debt
it was timing too. I mean, this was also right after the Great Recession as well.
Right.
So I think people were ready to just be a little more flexible.
But then it turned out that wasn't enough. It turned out that we had a structural problem with income tax receipts from the wealthy that kept making our projections every quarter falling way off.
Yeah, but that also is some of it. You see this so often on the municipal and state level, is that we just make very rosy projections. And sometimes it's just, let's just get out of here. We'll come back next year.
But the first time when he's elected, I thought his idea was the first year he was going to get through the pain, get the tax increase and the labor concessions.
No.
He thought then we fix it, and then when I run for re-election, I can start giving some gimmies back when things are covered. But
it's like losing weight. If it takes you 20 years to gain it, it might take you 20 years to take it off. Yeah. We have decades to pay our debts down. And my whole argument is are we really just going to be punishing the middle class, the working poor, and state workers, and we're not asking the wealthy to pay in? But going back to the idea of Trump and Malloy. So one thing that I have been doing and making a priority is I've been around the state and helping out candidates in all parts of the state, which gives me the ability to sort of see where people who are situated differently, not just geographically, but also socioeconomically, and see what the things are that they're talking about. And right now, since we are focused on primary season, people are really more focusing on the base. So we're talking to mostly Democrats or left-leaning, unaffiliated independents. And what we're seeing is that, the topics are two things. It's property taxes and it's Malloy/Trump. Usually Trump. And even though Malloy is more unpopular, it's really Trump that comes up because it's Trump that actually scares people. Malloy is unpopular, but Trump actually scares people. So I do think, yes, I think there's going to be a blue wave. I was talking with the Majority Leader Matt Ritter just a couple weeks ago. And if we had to put an over-under on where we'd be after November elections this year, he figured the over-under was at about 83.5 seats in the House, which would be about a 4-seat pickup, because I figured we're going to be about 84. Could be wrong. We're going to lose some incumbents. We're going to gain some newcomers. But then when you look to the Senate, we might be 18-18 again. We have some strong candidates. We have some weak candidates. And you just don't know. And I think given the fact that CBIA was able to dump $400,000,
Business and Industry Association,
because they were able to dump so much money into elections last cycle, the $400,000, and they were able to win so many seats for the first time in such a long time. I think that we're going to see an influx of money like we've never seen before. And of course, the 2010 citizens election decision means that our hands are tied in terms of ways that we can combat it.
But
for
if
example,
Ned Lamont is the Democratic candidate governor, you're going to have as much money as they have, because he could spend $10 million in his campaign.
Sure.
Although he hasn't always spent that money in ways. He spent that kind of money to run against Dan Malloy in 2010, and he lost. I haven't seen him. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. You see something. I don't see any inspiration from his candidacy so far. No. He spent a lot of money in an ad that was a complete dud.
Right. So here's the thing: is CEP is great for a
Citizen
myriad
election program.
Yep,
it's great financing.
It's great for a myriad of reasons. And what I tell people, it's good for 3 reasons. 1, it puts everybody on an equal playing field. 2, it makes sure that the barrier to entry is low. And 3, it makes sure you're not listening to big name donors or high profile donors that just want a specific thing done that they're lobbying for. But also, it goes to show that you have the support of your constituency. And the problem, if you're not using CEP, it's really hard to tell what sort of benefit are you getting? What sort of push are you getting from that groundswell? So if you look over the past 10 years, how many governors on the Democratic side have raised that money for CEP? And the answer is one. Dan Malloy is the only person who's ever raised that money. So I remember I was at the convention, and Susan Beiswitz's consultant came to me and said, I think the system's broken. I think it's just too hard to raise this money. But what that means to me is maybe the system is not broken, because if you look at the Republican side, I think 4 or 5 governor candidates have raised the money. It's really just the Democratic side. And we're actually having a really tough time this year raising money, not just from labor unions, but from people who are maybe just maxed out, giving to Planned Parenthood, NARAL, giving to ACLU, whatever the case may be, and just don't feel like they can give to Democratic candidates. So the nice thing about CEP is it allows people to give a little bit less. That goes a longer way. But the money in and of itself doesn't win an election. My problem has always been not that.
You need enough to compete, but you don't need so much. Linda McMahon spent $50 million twice, did not win.
Exactly. There's a base level that you need. And the biggest problem to me in terms of outside money is that once you get elected, who are you listening to? It's not the money gets you elected. It's that who are your allegiances to? And so you can say,
why are Democrats going with Ned Lamont? He goes against everything you've been saying about how the process should work.
Because a phenomenal candidate, Kevin Lembo, dropped out. He just decided that he could do a better job from comptroller position, which I was deeply disappointed by, because he's a personal friend of mine. I think he would have done a great job.
You supported Sue Beiswitz too,
and I supported Susan Beiswitz for governor. It wasn't a blank slate endorsement for anything she wanted to run for. I supported her when she was going to run for state senate. I supported her when she was going to run for governor. But then when she ended up running against another personal friend of mine, Ava, who I know after having had multiple
Zimmerman, lieutenant governor,
exactly, who I've had multiple conversations with, who I know is in lockstep with me on a whole number of issues that we're not even talking about, that we're not going to run on, that we're not even really going to push yet, that I became really excited to swivel towards her. So what was the question?
Well, one question is how you ended up with Lamont. Didn't Lembo and others see a poll that showed no Democrat beating a Republican for governor?
I think that was part of the problem too, is that people like a year and a half ago saw how unlikely it was. Now, that said, a year and a half out, people aren't really thinking about the governorship, and they're really thinking about how much they dislike Malloy. Well, the thing is, Malloy's not on the ticket, and it always goes back to that question: Malloy and Trump, which effect is going to be stronger? And we don't know. But I know for a fact that this state has had supermajorities of Democrats, both in the House and in the Senate. And then we've had a Republican governor. So because of the Gold Coast, because of Fairfield, Greenwich, Westport area, because of more rural areas, because of the shoreline, we have this tendency to split our vote, that we do go with the party, with the person, not the party. And that for that reason, it is very, very possible to win majorities back, but then lose that top spot.
So you think we might have a Republican governor come the fall?
I think it is very possible that we do, yes.
And who do you see as the most formidable Republican?
I think the general feeling within the political circles is that Bound's got the best shot. We'll see. Who
it's
knows?
So open because only 25,000 votes can win that Republican primary.
I know.
And some of these hedge fund guys have a lot of money. I mean, really, in both parties, you have Democrat and Republican. You have candidates who have no experience in government who say just because they're rich guys, in some cases inherited, they can know better than people they just dismiss as idiots in government. How do you feel about that trend?
Oh, as soon as they get up there and realize they can't get anything done because what they thought politics was, it's not, then you just can nod your head and say, yeah, see, you can't fix it either.
Are you supporting anyone for governor?
I'm just watching right now. I think that my priority is, instead of thinking about this, of getting the best gubernatorial candidate, which will help out the local races, my goal is to work with the best local candidates and help them get the turnout and help them get people excited, and that will help up ticket. And that is my goal. We do have Chris Murphy on the ticket in November as well, which I think will be really, really helpful for us, because he's a fighter. He's great. He's great on a number of issues that are important, not just to me, but also to constituents throughout the state. And I think that will help. But I think that there is just a general lack of enthusiasm for the gubernatorial race.
How did they end up in that situation?
So
how did we end up with nobody that anyone get excited about?
Because it's hard to raise the money. So, look back to last year. Who were the people that were in the race? We had John Harris. We had Susan Beiswitz. We had Dan Drew. We had Kevin Lembo. People that just within the course of the year dropped out. And then the whole field shifted. And some of it was, it's hard to raise the money. But also, B, it's like, well, I have the best chance of making it. So then if you drop out, maybe you'll become an agency head. You back me, help me raise some money. We'll work together. And I think that it's a very natural winnowing process. But there was this sense, I mean, for myself personally, is that we're up at the convention and it's like, my God, it just feels like this room was bought. And it's just like, for someone who believes so strongly in campaign finance reform, it's like, I just cannot reconcile the fact that we have somebody who's just trying to buy the election. And, it's also making it really hard. And this is not a complaint about CP or anything, but there is the difficulty right now in a lot of state races where there is just not nearly enough people to run the races, to be campaign managers or field directors. A lot of them are getting sucked up into the gubernatorial election and other statewide elections. But I also think that we have a really big problem in terms of, since we are seen as a blue state, we've sort of let the reins go a little bit in terms of this organization. And I think because of that, there hasn't been enough people in the pipeline to be working on all these different small races. And one of my personal goals is to be trying to do party building in that sense. So over the next 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years, that we have more people that are actually able to help out on these races.
All right. You listen to Josh Elliott, State Rep Hamden. We got a few minutes left. Josh, the Working Families Party is dedicated to trying to get people elected in primaries as well as general elections in the Democratic Party who support issues like $15 minimum wage an hour, paid family leave, legalized marijuana, highway tolls. And you also are in favor, if I remember correctly, for raising marginal income tax rates on the wealthy, go from 6.99 to 7.5% on either over half a million.
Only 7.5?
Well, what do you think?
Well, I know that New York and New Jersey are just shy of 9%, and I know that New York State specifically has a millionaire's tax that's even higher. So we could at least go 2 percentage points higher and still be competitive.
So go to 8.9.
Sure.
Okay. So the Working Families Party, did they support you last time around?
They did.
All right. Now, they didn't support a woman in New York named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's the big star, I'm guessing, has your heart thumping.
Sure.
She did a big surprise upset in Democratic primary against the fourth most powerful member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Joseph Crowley. So she got the nomination. So that would mean she should get elected in Brooklyn and the Bronx, I believe, are her districts.
Should be.
But because the Working Families Party supposedly exists to enable people like her to emerge, they thought she had no chance, so they supported Crowley against her in the primary. So now Crowley is going to appear in the general election on a third-party line that doesn't support him.
Right.
And now people like Joe Lieberman, who are anathema to the Working Families Party, are urging people to vote on the Working Families Party's line to prevent a Democratic socialist from getting elected.
Right.
It could happen.
Sure.
Or they could elect the Republican that way. Any thoughts on what that means about the strategy the Working Families Party has pursued?
So I became interested in the Ocasio campaign about 7 months ago when I was on Reddit and I saw her posting in a thread about net neutrality, and I immediately began contributing to her campaign, and I've been contributing every month since. So it was very rewarding to see her win. I'm contributing to two people outside the state, her and Carolyn Bordeaux, who's running in Georgia, who's actually, she's in a primary, and the election is today. So I'm sending her good vibes and hoping that she wins. So in terms of, WFP inner politics,
it's really WTF at this point. In
sure. So what happens in Connecticut, what happens in New York can be wildly divergent. There is some general centralized organization, but Lindsay Farrell in Connecticut has a lot of leeway to run the party as she sees fit, and whoever runs the New York organization has leeway to run the party as they see fit. And we also know that there was a big rift this year in terms of which unions were with WFP, and many unions left WFP because they wanted
of the Cuomo.
Because of the Cuomo thing, right? So,
but the ones who remained in the party were the more progressive, who wanted to go with Cynthia Nixon, so that would not have heard of Ocasio.
Right. So, it's going to depend on, really, ultimately, end of the day, just a few personalities that are in some of these smaller circles. And it's that age-old question: do we go with a person who isn't there entirely with us on the issues because we think they have the best shot and they also are the closest to leadership? Or do we go with this person who is in lockstep with us on the issues, but we don't think she's got a real shot to win? And if we back candidates that don't have real shots to win, does that make our name less worthwhile? So last cycle in 2016, WFP participated in 5 primaries, and they won every single one.
In Connecticut.
And they do an absolutely phenomenal job. picking those candidates that they think have the best shot, that will work hard, that have that home base connection, and that also espouses their beliefs. But maybe that that wasn't such an easy answer in New York, only because she was a truly insurgent candidate on a much different level.
No one thought she'd win.
It didn't matter to me whether she was going to win. I wanted her to win, and when I say that, it didn't.
Question.
Yes.
So, like, I understood why in Connecticut people didn't jump on Brian Anderson challenging Rosa DeLauro in a primary because she's as progressive as you get.
Well, how does it get better?
So, but I don't get New York, because if you're not going to be willing to lose some primaries in order to promote the people who really
maybe you're not being aggressive enough,
exemplify your position.
Sure.
I understand it's a very honest debate that has existed on the left and on the right.
Yep.
For as long as I've been alive and much longer, which is that you do want to win elections. You do want to be at the table to have an influence to get your issues in. That's why some unions did beg the Working Families Party to stick with Cuomo, because they believe if someone generally is going to give you what you get, what you want, it's worth it if they're obviously going to win. But then does that become a slippery slope?
Sure
because
does.
Ocasio seems like the biggest disaster I can think of in left politics in my recent memory. The fact that now Ocasio might lose because people like Lieberman can convince people to vote Working Families Party in the fall.
I think the chance of her losing now, the general, is very unlikely given what she was able to overcome in the primary. So I would not be worried about that. And I also wouldn't be worried about whatever sway that Lieberman has in New York as
I'm not
well.
thinking Lieberman. I'm thinking Crowley.
Oh, sure. And
he has a big organization. If he had paid attention to the primary, he would have done better. He was arrogant.
Yeah.
So now he's got a line, and he can convince. He's going to have independent voters and Republicans.
Sure.
And he could say socialist to marginalize her. I think if he wants to, he might not want to.
You think he goes negative? You think he uses that term and uses that as a slur? I don't think he does. I think that cuts against him.
Though?
I think it would be such a mistake
he
for him to
refused
run.
to take his name off the ballot because only he could do it. He had to have his name put somewhere else, and he came up with reasons that were sort of respectable to say, but no one bought it. He could publicly say, "Thank you, Joe Lieberman, for telling everyone to vote for me. Please don't."
Yeah.
He's not saying that.
Yeah. I think that there's also a certain sting that comes as soon as you have a loss that makes it hard for you to be...
he was so gracious that night when he sang Born to Run.
Right. He was gracious that night. I think he was probably still in shock. So I'm not concerned about that race, and I'm not concerned about him being on the line. I think at this point, Ocasio's got it.
And so does Philip Thibodeau, right? Saying, "Come on, Paul. No way Ocasio loses."
Yeah, not at this point. I don't think so either.
Okay. Before we go, any thoughts on the Mueller probe and Trump? Any predictions of what's going to happen to our country while you're running these local races?
Oh God, let's just hold the fort. That's all I can think is let's just hold the fort. He's trying to inject his people into agencies. He's trying to inject people into the courts. We have the benefit of the fact that he's completely inept at basically everything that he does, and that he's surrounded himself with fairly inept people. And the people that are not inept are people that are a little bit more moderate-minded. So I think we'll be okay.
And Harry George says, "Socialist is a slur. Laugh out loud."
Yeah.
So you think we're going to be okay?
I think we're going to be okay.
You don't wake up every day, see the latest news about Trump, and think, "Oh man, we're doomed."
No,
fascism's coming.
It's important to pay attention. I have some people on the left that what does politics look like in a fascist country? What does it look like when people become silenced? But I think that Washington Post, New York Times, and a lot of these really important newspapers, the Fourth Estate, you as well are doing a great job of keeping people educated. And I think that's really all that it is. Let's just make sure that we're paying attention. And the best thing that we can do is go out in November and vote for the person that's going to make sure that we come back to sanity.
Well, thank you, Josh Elliott, for coming on WNHH's Dateline New Haven. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure mine.
And thank you for reminding us to have optimism.
Of course.
You ran last time. You had optimism.
Yeah.
You didn't trash anybody, but you said you can beat the party establishment in a positive way and change things.
Sure, it takes work.
And you're doing that this time, so keep smiling.
Thank you.
All right. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks, Phil, for the questions, and Harry. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.